What's going on, guys? Pleiades Payout 10 has just wrapped up, which is one of many online H.A.T format tournaments that's played through the H.A.T Alliance Discord server and then played on Dueling Book. If you're interested in playing in events like this one, you can go down to the video description and find the link to the H.A.T Alliance Discord server and join that and be able to play in events like this. Pleiades Payout is a slightly smaller tournament usually, but it is one of the few that actually has a cost to enter, but you can actually win money from it, while many of the other ones are free to play. So definitely go and check that out. That H.A.T Alliance Discord server did just recently hit over 3,000 members, so definitely lots of people wanting to talk about H.A.T format and play in H.A.T format events, so definitely check that out. But for this video, I want to go over what decks actually entered this event, look at the top 4 deck lists and everything you need to know about that event. And so anyways, guys, let's get straight into this. So as mentioned, this event is one of the slightly smaller events. This one only had 15 players, but definitely some very good players at that. And so let's take a look at what decks actually entered this event. There were 4 Artifact Traptrix variants, 2 Geargia, 2 Gadget, which is really impressive to see that, more people are trying the Gadget deck. I know it just came off of a big win, so I'm guessing a lot more people wanted to mess around with that, though at the same time, I believe this event had begun right around the same time that the other event was going on where that deck actually won. A lot of these tournaments are multi-day, so for that being said, maybe there was some crossover, maybe not, of people who were already trying to test it and entered both. Then there was 1 Geargia Karakuri, 1 Firefist Traptrix, 1 Fire King, 1 Sylvan, 1 Mermail, 1 Geargia Chain Material Burn. This is basically the Blaze Phoenix FTK or OTK, whatever you want to call it. Really cool deck, honestly. And 1 Artifact Thunder. I've mentioned so many times, this is a deck that a lot of people have been trying to mess with more, and it's been getting a lot more representation. So a really cool deck at that. I mean, honestly, for a smaller event, none of this really stands out to me. Again, it's another one of those events where we aren't seeing any Spellbook, which is a bit interesting given how popular of a deck it is. But usually for these smaller tournaments, a lot of people do want to try out some of the more random or rogue options. Even though there is like a lot of what you would call meta in here, obviously being Artifact Traptrix and Geargia. We see a little bit of Mermail mixed in, a little bit of Sylvan. Like, nothing is too crazy here, given, everything I mentioned. But seeing, I guess, 4 Artifact Traptrix and only 2 Geargia is a bit interesting, but at the same time, there is that Geargia Karakuri, as well as the Chain Material Burn Geargia deck. So realistically, it was just about even if we're looking at, Artifact Traptrix types decks. But anyways, yeah, that was it for the decks that actually entered. And going over here to the top deck representation, there was 1 of the Gadget decks made top 4, the Artifact Thunder deck made top 4, one of the Geargia lists. I'm not sure if this is Geargia Hands or just pure Geargia. We will have to see. And then the Geargia Chain Material Burn actually made it. So looking at that, there was 2 one-of decks, the 1 of the Geargia decks, and 1 of the Gadget decks. So overall, even that is a good spread. 4 different decks, in theory, were able to top this event. So without further ado, let's actually see what those placings were. So taking down the whole event was actually Aram on Artifact Thunder. So that Artifact Thunder deck being able to take it down is actually really cool. I'm pretty sure Aram has had other tops with this deck in the past. I know there's some other players who have also, again, been trying to push this deck, and so it'll be interesting to see how similar their list is to the last time. I somewhat remember their list. Probably once I see it, I'll have a better understanding of it, but great player, and honestly, really cool to see that. In second place is Sawisky, sorry if I mispronounced your name, who is on Geargia. If I remember correctly, they had just got second place, I want to say, or third place at, I think it was an Exciton elimination. And if so, I think they were on Geargia Hands from what I remember. And so it might be a pretty similar list to that one, given that was like the last event that took place, but we will have to see on that. Molson on the Chain Material Burn Geargia deck. They've topped with this deck in the past. I don't entirely remember their list. I remember a couple things like Planet Pathfinder at 1, and I don't entirely remember what else. So probably, again, once I see it, I will remember. And then lastly I guess I should say that either Molson got 3rd or 4th. I have to say this every time that they do 3rd and 3rd. It is what it is, but in 3rd or 4th place was the Gadget deck, and this was Vulpix. I actually had recently spoken with them. A very nice person, and they send in some replays that I do have recorded, so I will be showing those off at some point. I think I've shown them off in the past as well, and so the lists that they had sent me, there was some really unique stuff, so I'm hoping it's one of those builds, but they have been a die-hard Gadget player. I think one of the first times I ever showed off one of their lists or replays on the channel was actually with Gadgets, so really, really cool to see that, and congrats to all these players. I really look forward to looking at these deck lists, so let's take a look at them, starting with Aram's first place deck list. All right, so looking at this list, I sort of remember it, I sort of don't. I definitely feel like there's a few changes from the last time I looked at an Artifact Thunder list. I remember that the number of Mermelios was going from, like, I think at one point people were playing like 1, and then it was 2, and now it's 3. I don't remember if they had already got up to 3 by that point. The other thing is the 3 copies of Double Cyclone. I seem to remember that most decks were on like anywhere from 1 to 2, but there was a couple decks in the last tournament review that I actually went over that was playing 3 of them, which is somewhat interesting given the ratio of artifacts we're seeing here with the 1 Beagle Tack, 2 Moral Tack, and the 1 Scythe. So cutting down actually on Moral Tack and instead playing the copy of Scythe, though obviously we've seen in the past a lot of decks playing a full spread of artifacts, some even going as much as playing 6 artifacts in the main. And looking at the side, you know, Aram does usually side an extra copy of Scythe, so maybe, you know, having that extra Scythe in there and the 3 copies of Double Cyclone does somewhat make sense, especially just being able to see this early on with copies of Ignition is very strong. And then other than that, I feel like, I don't remember if they were on Max C. I know one of the builds was on 2 Max C, but seeing that here now, if anything, you know, it does kind of help against some of those faster decks, whereas this deck kind of has the ability to play at a slower pace while still being able to get a lot of advantage with the artifacts and kind of slowly take over and then make bigger pushes. The ratio of 2 Watt Cobra and 2 Watt Giraffe is basically the same as what it's been. Really, you don't have that much of a preference. If you see 1, usually you're doing good, and with the Seahorse, you're hoping to see Seahorse before you're seeing these anyways. The 2 copies of Ma Hunter is, again, very similar to what it's been, and other than that, yeah, the deck just looks very much like what I remember it looking like. Maybe there was a difference in the trap lineup. I think maybe a Traptrix Treble Nightmare was different, if I remember, or maybe they were on like a Compulse or something, but I don't entirely remember. Overall, you know, the lists have been becoming more, you know, consistent over time, so that is something really nice to see. And other than that, like, even the side deck looks very, you know, good. Nothing really stands out as awkward or a weird side deck option or anything like that. So there's that as well. And same with the extra deck. Everything for the most part looks pretty much what you'd expect from it. And I've had a couple people say, like, about the card by card. I am going to go through the card by card for this one, since this should probably be a shorter video, but moving forward, I might test out not doing the card by card and just talking a little more about the decks, especially for those ones where I'm going over like top 8 and stuff like that. So for the card by card, we see 1 Beagle Tack, 2 copies of Moral Tack, 1 copy of Scythe, 2 copies of Ma Hunter, 2 copies of Max C, 3 copies of Thunder Seahorse, 3 copies of Traptrix Mermelio, my apologies, 2 copies of Watt Cobra, 2 Watt Giraffe, For the spells, 3 Ignition, 3 Double Cyclone, 2 Instant Fusion, 3 copies of Duality, and the 1 Soul Charge. For the traps, we see 3 Sanctum, 1 Bottomless, 3 Call the Haunted, 1 copy of Warning, 1 copy of Torrential, and 1 copy of Trapple Nightmare. For the side deck, the 1 Scythe and 2 copies of Crow, and the 3rd Max C. Gotta love to see when they play the extra copy in the side. 1 Dark Hole, 1 Dimensional Fissure, 1 Mind Control, and 2 MST. I could definitely see them not needing as much MST, not siding 3, obviously, because they're already maining 3 copies of Double Cyclone. The 1 copy of Acid Trap Hole, 2 copies of Blackhorn of Heaven, 2 copies of Breakthrough Skill, and the 1 Deep Dark Trap Hole. For the extra deck, we see Mavelus and Ojama Knight. And for the rest of the extra deck, we see the Dweller, Karen Gorgon, Constellar Omega, Pleiades, and M7, Exciton, the copy of Cowboy, 101, Ragna Zero, Black Ship of Corn, Rhapsody and Berserk, the copy of Crazy Box, and lastly, the copy of Tyrus. Overall, really great list. Always like to see a good RM win, or just top in general. The creator of the hatformatmeta.com. Gotta love that site for all the resources and stuff like that. Again, congrats to this player, and let's move on to the next list. Next up, we have Sawisky's Geargia Hand list, and if I'm being completely honest, now that I see this, it does look basically the same as I remember from their last top. And in general, this is like, if you think of Geargia Hands, in my opinion, this looks like a very standard build, which obviously I'm not trying to downplay, them as a player or anything. It looks great. It honestly is really good to see. I think maybe 3 Soul Charge, I think the last time I talked about this deck seemed like a little bit much, but at the same time, usually the Hands build does play, at bare minimum 2 copies of Soul Charge, so playing that is a little bit more, but at the same time, it all looks really, really good. They're on the 3, Fiendish Chain and the 2 copies of Breakthrough Skill, as well as a copy of Needle Sealing, which is always, an option in this deck, as well as choosing to play MSTs over something like Wiretap, which personally, I really like to see that. It's usually pretty cool. And yeah, other than that, everything looks pretty solid. So let's go through that card by card real quick. 2 copies of Fire Hand, 2 copies of Ice Hand, the 3 Accelerator, the Geargiano, and the 3 MK2s, the 3 copies of Armor, 3 copies of Arsenal, and 2 Max C in the main, choosing Max C over Crow. And for the spells, we see the Book of Moon, Dark Hole, 3 copies of MST, and 3 Soul Charge. For the traps, the Bottomless, 2 copies of Breakthrough Skill, Compulse, 3 copies of Fiendish Chain, 3 copies of Geargia Gear, 1 Needle Sealing, the Warning, and the Torrential Tribute. For the side deck, we see 1 copy of Cycle Reader, 3 Crow, and the 3rd Max C, so definitely maxing out on everything that you need in terms of hand traps here. The 1 Dimensional Fissure, 1 Mind Control, and 2 Noblemen a Crossout, 2 copies of Blackhorn of Heaven, 3 copies of Debunk, and the 1 copy of Macro. Honestly, all of that looks really good, and yeah, nothing really stands out as different in the side deck. It looks very nice. And for the extra deck, 1 Dweller, 1 copy of Emerald, the Exciton Cowboy, 3 copies of Gear Gigant, 1 Alucard, 101, Ragna Zero, 1 copy of Acid Golem, the Black Ship, the Rhapsody and Berserk, the Soul of Silver Mountain, and lastly, a copy of Zenmanes. Again, really clean list. It looks really great, and, consistently getting tops with it shows you what a good player they are with the deck as well. So congrats to this player, and on to the next one. So here we have the Blaze Phoenix Geargia Hands list, and again, I don't entirely remember this list. I always find it impressive that how much stuff this deck can actually fit in, because when you really look at this compared to the Geargia Hands list, it doesn't feel like it's really missing anything, but somehow, you're fitting your copies of Chain Material in here, your Fusion Gates, your Planet Pathfinder. So I was right about that. There was just 1 copy of Planet Pathfinder. But yeah, it's just always crazy to me how they can fit so much. And in a way, it makes sense, given what they've had to take out. For example, not playing any sort of hand traps, as well as maybe, in the last list was playing MSTs and stuff. Here instead, we're seeing trap stuns because because when you kind of are already trying to go off, being able to just trap stun and guarantee that you get the win, obviously being able to burn with your copies of Blaze Phoenix when need be, the deck just works. It can play the slow grindy game, but it can also just kind of OTK you out of nowhere, which is always something cool to see. And yeah, I mean, there's not really a lot to say about this list. Again, we have seen it before on the channel, and it is really cool what it does. Chain Material being able to help you fusion summon with material from your deck and stuff, and the Fusion Gate being able to use your graveyard and stuff to get your Blaze Phoenixes and then just burn going through triple copies of this, or your Volcanon if need be. Yeah, and that's kind of funny actually, now that I see they also are having a copy of Alucard in the side, so maybe in certain matchups, you know, where there's more back row or it's a little harder to actually pull off the burn and stuff, being able to put this in to kind of help outgrind the opponent, because, you know, Geargia is known to be a bit of a grindy deck, so pretty cool to see that. So let's go through that card by card. 3 copies of Fire Hand and 2 copies of Ice Hand. We've talked about this before. Usually decks that want to, you know, particularly deal with one thing over another, in this case being like monsters versus spells, you do have access to more copies of Fire Hand because you'd rather see it early on. Plus, for the copy of Blaze Phoenix, you are going to need fires, so just having more access to that. The 3 copies of Accelerator, the 1 Geargiano, 3 copies of MK2, 3 Armor, 3 Arsenal, 2 copies of Ice Hand, I believe I already said that, and the 1 Planet Pathfinder to be able to find your copy of Fusion Gate, as well as it being a machine, which is somewhat relevant. After that, the 2 Fusion Gate and 3 copies of Soul Charge, not playing anything like Book of Moon or MST as I mentioned previously, or Upstarts or anything, especially Upstart you wouldn't want to play because you're trying to burn in a lot of cases, so it just makes it a little more difficult and you won't really be able to pull it off if you use Upstart. For the traps, we see the 1 Bottomless, 2 copies of Breakthrough Skill, as well as 2 copies of Fiendish, so they went 2 and 2, which is kind of interesting instead of 3, but again, needing to make space makes sense. 3 copies of Chain Material, 3 copies of Geargia Gear, 1 Warning, 1 Torrential, and 3 copies of Trap Stun. For the side deck, it kind of just looks like a basic Geargia side deck outside of, I guess, the copy of Alucard, which is going to be the 1 copy of Cycle Reader and 2 copies of Crow. I guess that's also something, no max C, but that's kind of a given, you know, given that they're playing everything else that we see here. The 1 Alucard, 1 Dark Hole, 1 Dimensional Fissure, 1 copy of Mind Control, and they are playing 2 MST in the side, I would assume, for, you know, going second. Sometimes you might not want all the trap stuns, especially given you have kind of back row removal in the Ice Hands and stuff at time, plus just against, you know, the really grindy decks, as I mentioned before, sometimes just dealing with their back row is nice. 2 copies of Blackhorn, 2 copies of Debunk, Macro, and Soul Drain. For the extra deck, we see the 3 copies of Blaze Phoenix, the 1 Volcanon, the Dweller, the copy of the Coach Gainer, I forget what, Giant Great Trainer, the thing that you basically can use your 3 copies of the Blaze Phoenix if you're not able to go for the full OTK and basically get 3 draws and do more burn damage. 1 copy of Emerald, 1 copy of Direwolf, 1 Exciton, 3 copies of Gear Gigant. For some reason, I remember that some of these builds for this version of Geargia cut down on this to 2, but maybe I'm getting it confused with Geargia Karakuri. 1 copy of 101, the 1 copy of Black Ship, and lastly, 1 copy of Soul of Silver Mountain. My apologies. And yeah, so that is the list. Really cool. Congrats to this player, and let's move on to that last deck list I have for you guys today. Last up, we do have Vulpix's Gadget deck, and honestly, it's kind of exactly what I would hope it would be, which is using the rank up magic cards. They're playing the Barians one, if I remember correctly, and the Quick Chaos. So I'll click on this real quick, and so what this card does is target 1 rank 4 Xyz monster you control, special summon from your extra deck 1 number C monster that's 1 rank higher than that monster you control by using it it as Xyz material. This special summon is treated as an Xyz summon. Xyz material attached to it also becomes Xyz material on the summon monster. So really, really cool card, and this is basically utilized a lot of times to go into from a 101 into a C101, and anyone who plays like current meta with decks like Vanquish Soul and the Canine and stuff know how powerful of a card this is, being able to steal a special summon monster, as well as it can kind of float when it has 101 as a material, and then also gaining some life points, which is really nice to see. This card is so cool. It's always been one of my favorites, and same with Quick Chaos. Quick Chaos is very similar to this one, except it's a quick play, so being able to, if your opponent's going to say out your 101, being able to quickly go into that is nice. It also can help you dodge certain cards. For example, say a 101's attacking in and an opponent has something like a Deep Prison or something. The Quick Chaos is pretty cool. I'll click on it and go over that. Target one number monster you control except a number C monster. Special summon from your extra deck one number C monster with the same number in its name as a target, but one rank higher by using it as an Xyz material, and then all the other stuff I mentioned previously about being able to only do it once per turn, or not once per turn, the materials and stuff transferring over and stuff. But really cool to see that. I know in one of the replays they sent, they were playing one of the other, I think it was the C Rhapsody guy, but here we see they actually aren't playing that. And you guys will get the chance to see that when I put that replay review out. But overall, really cool to see. Compared to the last gadget list that we saw top, this one is actually playing 3 of all the gadgets. The other list had been playing, I think, 3 green and 2 of the others, as well as they've kind of cut down on extenders. The other list, I think, was playing Photon Thrasher, which is commonly played in the deck, and I think 1 or 2 other things. Also here we see they are choosing to go with the double summons that we've been seeing more versus the chain summoning. The other build was playing, I think, 2 double summon and 1 chain summoning. Lists in the past were playing 3 copies of chain summoning, but here we do see just the 2, which I guess isn't really needed when you're, again, kind of maxing out on your gadgets. Only 2 copies of Mermail, but again, usually you're trying to get your line of gadgets going as quickly as possible. Plus, like, you gain a little less advantage from this when you're only playing, your usual 2 trap hole cards, being the Trap Hole Nightmare and the Bottomless. Obviously, into the side deck, there are going to be more copies of them, but at the same time, it really just depends your extenders as well, because of the Kagado Kages and Tin Goldfish and stuff. For example, if you go Tin Goldfish into a Mermail, you'll be able to pop a back row, but you're not actually getting a search out of it, so it doesn't necessarily gain you what you're trying to do. But also with the double summons, a lot of times you can kind of just get extra summons, so there's that too. But overall, really, really cool, and let's get into the card by card. So for the main deck, we see 3 green Gadget, 3 red Gadget, 3 yellow Gadget, 3 Kagado Kage, 2 copies of Tin Goldfish, 2 Mermail, and that is it for the monsters. 1 Darkhold, 2 Double Summon, 2 copies of Chalice, and 3 copies of Lance. Lance being able to insulate your plays against a lot of those back row decks, and, things like Chalice being really good when going second, especially against artifacts. 1 copy of Mind Control, 2 copies of the Barian rank up, the 1 copy of Quick Chaos, 3 copies of Soul Charge. For the traps, we see 1 Bottomless, 2 copies of Breakthrough, and 2 copies of Fiendish Chain. So again, seeing that 2-and-2 ratio is kind of cool. The 1 copy of Warning, 1 Torrential, 1 Trap Hole Nightmare, and 1 copy of Wiretap. So having the Wiretap just in case, with playing the 3 copies of Lance, having extra backup in a sense, especially going first, this card's always going to be pretty decent. For the side deck, we see 2 copies of Crow and 3 copies of Max C, a very common ratio we usually see in a lot of decks. 2 copies of MST. We've been seeing this in most builds, actually going with the MSTs in the sides and only playing 2 of them. For a while, you'd see a lot of 3-ofs in the side deck, but I guess cutting down on that for other things isn't bad either. The 1 Acid Trap Hole, 2 Blackhorn, 1 Compulse, 2 copies of Debunk, the 1 Deep Dark Trap Hole, and 1 Soul Drain. For the extra deck, we see 1 copy of Dweller, 1 Karen Gorgon, 1 copy of Emerald, 1 Direwolf, Exciton, Cowboy, 2 copies of King of the Feral Imps, making sure you can always have access to your Kage, 2 copies of 101, just a great card. A lot of decks usually do play 2 of this, at least in more modern times, but also, again, going into your C101 is really, really good. 1 copy of Ragnazero, 1 Black Ship, 1 Rhapsody and Berserk, and your 2 copies of C101. Just a great, great card. And when you're playing, 3 rank ups, you probably want to have access to multiple. So not just playing 1 is, it makes sense. And even with your Emerald, again, I've talked about this in the past. Sometimes you don't want to have to make an Emerald, shuffle your stuff back just to have to attempt to make another Xyz. Even though this deck is really good at making Xyz, it's just extra steps sometimes, so just playing the extra copy is pretty good there. Honestly, now that I think about it, none of the lists that top this were playing Heartland Draco, which a lot of builds usually will play that or Cowboy, but here we're seeing a lot more of just Cowboy here, so kind of neat to see that. But overall, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like on it, comment any questions or videos you want to see in the future, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to get notified anytime I put a new video out, share this video with your friends, and again, make sure to go down to the video description to find out how you can join the Hat Alliance Discord server and play in events like this. There's ones that take place all throughout the month, so you definitely don't want to miss out. Again, congrats to all the players here. Really great to see some variety as usual in the format. And anyways, guys, I will see you in the next video.